if we joined enough vortexes together, we were able to kind of create something that was equivalent to a soft sun, or even more powerful than a soft sun. We put 64 Vortex 8s together, which we called the Vortex 512, because it had 512 pixels. I used the cream source LNX system, created a monster of a light, which was game-changing for us.
My name is Eric Koritz. I'm a cinematographer. I'm most known for Ozark, Special Ops Lioness, and soon-to-be upcoming show Ransom Canyon on Netflix. That's it. As a cinematographer, to me, light is everything. Sculpting light to me is how I tell a story. Profoto as a brand is known for their quality of light. To me, it's exciting to be able to bring that into the cinema world. Using the L1600D on set makes my job easier and faster. Without a ballast, you can rig it in ways that other lights can't be rigged. What delicate work. It's much more versatile than a 1.8K HMI. It's small, you can plug it into a wall, and it's more powerful and more energy efficient. They have over 50 modifiers, but there's also a Bowens mount, so you can do an infinite amount of third-party modifiers. I feel like this light will change the way we work. What I love most about the L1600D is the power of the light, the quality of the light, which is beautiful. And then when you couple that with their cinema ecosystem of modifiers that you can make it an incredibly versatile light, it really brings out the best in an LED light.
All right, thank you everybody for being here. Welcome to the Aperture panel. This is collaboration and communication of lighting technology. Today we're going to be talking about color and how we communicate color on set between from director to DP to the technicians that have to execute this color. So today on my panel, first off we have Ed Moore, BSC. Ed is the director of photography on such shows as Silo and most recently Hijack, and also the feature film that came out yesterday called My Fault London. So thanks, Ed, for being here. We have Chris Stone, the gaffer of Hijack, Black Mirror, and The Crown. And we have Callum Crisell. He is the lighting programmer on Hijack. That'll be a theme today, the show Hijack. Black Mirror and Paddington in Peru. Additionally, we have Tim Kang. He's the principal engineer of imaging at Aperture, also a cinematographer, and part of the lighting committee of the ASC. So we're going to be starting off with Tim talking about kind of the state of color. I'm Ben Dynice. I'm a lighting programmer, ICLS, and the director of UX UI at Aperture. So to start off with, I'm going to pass it over to Tim, and let's talk about color.
All right, thank you. So I'm the opening act, so you can tune out for about 5 minutes, and then we'll go to the main act after this. So I wanted to just highlight the common topic here, and since I don't want to have to explain everything, or we don't want to explain everything during the talk, so what we're going to discuss is going to involve the topic of lighting color languages, and we want to clarify and recast the practice of how you communicate colors on set when you with your lighting team or with a gaffer or with a DP, with a director, etc. So now the philosophy always should be that this all functions for visual storytelling, not the other way around, right? And visual storytelling, of course, means that you have a very specific design choice that you need to make. So how do you clarify to an entire team of people that visual design choice and not have confusion? Because especially when you're doing a certain amount of setups per day and don't have a lot of time, things can get very chaotic and hairy very quickly, so you don't want to get confusion, right? So, so this all begins with the concept of what is color, right? Or the question of what is color. Color is really a subset of, at least academic subset of a topic called psychophysics, where you actually have psychology combined with the concept of physics, right? And in order to rethink how you think about color and lighting is you have to retrain your brain to think, well, lighting is light and light is energy. So you have to understand light in terms of its energy. And then when you discuss your understanding of that energy, that's where color comes in, because it's a construct in your head, not the physical thing, okay? So we have languages, therefore, to communicate color that usually are really psychological concepts. And these color languages, as a result, since they only talk about psychology, they can enable, but also limit our creative capacities, right? So the way they can enable, first of all, is if you're talking about, let's say, white light, generally you're talking about a technical thing. You can either on a creative level talk about warm and cold or blue and orange, or the dimension of green and magenta. And as you see on the screen here, these are the common methods that in photography and cinematography that we've used for the last 100 years or so of how to describe this dimension of color that we can all agree upon, right? And as things have evolved over the ages, the language that we have, you see on the different schemas of how do you categorize color and talk to another person on the film set are on the screen here. So we have white light variations, you have red, green, and blue ratios. Which proportion of red, green, and blue do you add together to mix a color? There's another type where you have subtractive, but I don't want to get into that. That's too confusing right now. And you have color swatches, which is basically gels, right? You have pink, sea green. What's the Lee number for that? I'm just kidding. And
116.
What was that?
116, peacock blue.
Yeah, there you go, peacock blue, right? Because there was sea green, that's my favorite cyan gel. And then hue and saturation, right? These are all typical means, and then more recently, using the literal XY coordinates, using this system of color called 1931 XY, right? All these are valid, but also all these could limit because they ignore the actual physics, right? So you can have 5 different physical forms of light that to your eye or to a camera may appear the same when shown on a gray card or white card, right? But when the physics differ, sure, you can have 2 different types of light that are balanced to, let's say, 3200 Kelvin, but when they shine onto the world, you can get vastly different results in camera. So this is the same color of fabrics, and shown with a 1K incandescent Fresnel, and the second set of fabrics on the bottom are what an LED wall set, with pushing out 3200 Kelvin would look like, right? Which has become a big problem with virtual production. So, and another example is here's you'll see in black and white first. I've matched the quality of light between real daylight and LED. It's about an 8-foot aperture of no pun intended of a huge bounce or light emitting or just a garage door that was open in this case, right? As you can see, I matched the quality of light, but when I go to color, you can see that there are differences due to the different energies. So even though the white balance is actually correct, there was a gray card in the shot that you don't see or hear, and there were white balance to the gray card, you do see these micro differences, right? So what I'm actually going to demonstrate, and this is the last portion, I promise you, is that if you look at this light right here, which color of red are we talking about, right? So if let's say just choose a different color space and say Rec 709 red that you can see there. If I choose P3, that's a different shade of red in the light. And if I, let's say, choose Rec 2020, it might be a little bit more richer and deeper. Now, that's just the color red. Now, let's say you color mix to cyan, and I go to, let's say, again, Rec 709, that's Rec 709, cyan, that's P3, and that's Rec 2020. So when we say the word color of cyan, you're getting a different result, even just by the fact of technical languages, let alone the spectrum coming out. So it's it could become very easy, but then all of a sudden become a huge point of confusion. So that's basically just to highlight the fact that the question of how do you meaningfully communicate both the radiometry and colorimetry of a light. Now, you don't have to be specific about the spectrum, but you know that you're going to get a different result on camera due to the spectrum, right? So there's a lot of different ways that people do this, have come up with different ways to do it. We'll talk about this, not exclusively, because you're going to fall asleep, but we will touch upon this as well, right? But this is a real problem, and a real tricky situation that we'll dive into right now. So there you go, 5 minutes? Yeah, 5 minutes.
All right, thanks, Tim. As we dive into the slides that Tim prepared, first we want to talk about a project that these three gentlemen worked on recently. That's the show Hijack. Ed, can you start us off and just set the scene? What was the gear you're using? What were the cameras? How big of a scale of a show was it? Can you jump into that?
Sure. We're just coming to the end of, well, for me, about a year working on season 2 of Hijack, which we're all under NDA on, so we can't say much more than it's still called Hijack. It's on Apple TV. So the first series Idris Elba was the world's unluckiest commuter. He was on a plane that got hijacked. This series, other stuff happens. But it was a very, very complicated show from a lighting point of view. I'm very grateful to have these guys along with me. I think we can get into the details, but we were largely studio-based. We had a lot of very large, extensive sets. They were colossally drowned in a huge variety of lighting. We had thousands and thousands of control channels. And we worked at an extremely fast pace. The director likes to do continuous days. So we'd be doing sort of 8 to 5. We'd be doing about 30 setups in that, 2 cameras, mixed different cameras. We live graded the whole show in HDR, and these guys were looking at those HDR Rec 2020 images. So we sort of, painted the show live onto monitors. Didn't meter it at all, but to keep up with the pace and the look we were going for was quite something.
So you brought up the monitors and meters. So let's dive into that. How much are you actually using a meter on set, and what's your workflow on a given day with the color?
I'm a really bad DP for metering. I was saying to these guys earlier, I found my meters with the batteries had melted out of them. I tend not to use it anymore. I find that for me personally, it makes much more sense to me to work off a monitor that I know and trust. It gives me all of the information that I need in 24 frames a second. Very occasionally on a recce or something, or planning something out, for absolute light levels, or checking a practical we've got no control over, we'll meter it. But generally, it's all going through Mark Glennis, who may be here somewhere, our DIT. I've worked with for years now, and I really trust what he presents me with. So yeah, that's the ultimate arbiter. These guys have meters. I don't know what they do with them.
So Chris and Callum, what about metering for you guys? Are you on set checking the color temperature of things, or how does that work?
Very rarely. I think my metering comes a lot more in prep. We worked with a lot of 5-color, RGB WW pixel tape and other tape, and that stuff needs to be kind of checked over, and I need to build the palettes so that they match the lights in. So if we had sort of diffused panels built into the set. And when we look at that, we need to make sure that that light, and if that's being, if Ed's communicating to me that that needs to be 6,000 Kelvin, I need to make sure that when I bring in a different floor lamp, that when that's at 6,000 Kelvin, those two match. And that's not built in intelligently in the tape or anything, so that needs to be all pushed into the desk. So that's the only time I really sort of meter, but I've got to have the time and prep to do that. And that's making sure that, building in green and magenta tints, particularly with tape where, you want to reduce some of the green, and there is no way of just going, okay, there is no tint level. You're just kind of mixing in with those colors. So building those palettes early is the only way I can really use a meter effectively.
Yeah, the meters never came out, not once. As technical as Tim's intro was, it's more done on the fly. It's more intuitive. It's more just lighting by monitors, especially as what we see or what we might meter is not going to correspond with the LUT that's been built in anyway. So we have to make sure that once it all goes through the DIT, that it actually is the way we want it to look.
So let's talk about that communication between, so it starts with the director talks, of course, the DOP, and does that start on the creative side, and how does that go from the creative to the technical?
Well, Jim Phil Smith, the director and showrunner on Hijack, this is my third project with him. I know how he likes to work, which helps a lot. So I'm very confident, changing things quite rapidly. And we sort of, our first few weeks of shooting kind of works as a prep, as I'm sure it does for most of you. But he trusts me and the team to sort of make a lot of those decisions. So in the prep time that we did have, we spend a lot of time with palettes, and I love this style. I love getting into the color science early on in prep, and then the closer you come to the actual shoot, it's just that everyone's got a plan until you punch in the face, and the shoot, once the shoot itself starts, it's really difficult to keep that type of sort of high level concept in your head, because you're just dealing with, well, we've got to get through 12 strips today. There's a look, there's an aesthetic that Jim and I, and the designer and I, discussed that we wanted to track through, and actually we on this show we weren't particularly interested in it looking sort of rich and full spectrum even. It's a show that is quite grungy and has a sort of, it's a thriller, it's sort of almost like a Cold War-y vibe, and so a lot of the sources our references for them were kind of industrial sources. So we'd often, speak in that language of a sodium halide or high bay industrial lighting. We'd look at all that kind of stuff. Everything would be. It was helpful sometimes that some of the LED practicals didn't have full spectrum. It had a sort of a thin look that I quite liked. But then we've got, Idris Elba. We've got a huge film star in the show. He needs to look. Apple don't want him to look thin and bad. So I need to make sure that we're filling him. We're feeding the camera with the information it needs to be able to reproduce his skin tone. But yeah, so communication on set, it will be. I'll iterate quite quickly over we generally only get 3 or 4 takes maybe with Jim, but the first 2, on a new set will be quite speculative for me, and we're all on a Bolero comm system, which I find essential. So Chris, Callum, and I will just sort of rapidly. We'll have an idea of what we want to do, but we'll change it quite quickly. We tend to communicate on this show in terms of color, temperature, and green, magenta. That tends to be our sort of language. But we will often get to take 3 and have quite a significantly different look to take 1.
So then you're not working in XY. You're just purely in color, temperature, plus and minus green, and dialing in from there. Can you explain how that communication works? You said you're on a closed system.
Yeah, so do we like Bolero? It's great if you're...
Yeah, I do. I think for those that don't know what a Bolero is, it has multiple channels that can be assigned. So on my system, I had 3 channels. A main, with which the director, the first ED, art, standby art did, and Chris, and basically most people on there. a second one, which was me, Ed, and Chris. And then a third one, which was the Sparks channel, the lighting channel, so I could talk to Chris and also the rest of the lighting team if I needed to communicate something with them. All three channels are operating exactly the same time.
It drove me absolutely crazy.
Sometimes I'd see Chris across the set just like holding the headset, just with a sort of pained expression. It was high bandwidth, I think.
Yeah, because the different channels don't know when the other channel's talking, so you get everyone just talking in your ears at the same time.
However, it is really good in moments of, for example, talking about color and talking about, okay, so we want this, let's set it at a base of 4,000 Kelvin. But we want this to give this a more industrial look, so let's pull some green into that. So then I'll take it into the hue, a sort of green hue, and then we'll play with the saturation. We might say, okay, now make it more cyan than it is kind of green in that sense, and then we'll drag it that way. And I will be having those conversations with Ed almost directly.
Yeah, it cuts me out of the equation. It simplifies it. So Ed and Callum will talk about the colour and
it's quite
in between them.
Yeah, it's quite a fast workflow in that sense, because then we can focus on that while Chris is focusing on other things with the lighting team.
Yeah, when it works well, it's glorious, because I can just waffle out ideas and then try and stop talking, and then the information can flow to the full team, and then Chris can pass on to this big team of floor sparks. I mean, just to give you guys an idea of the scale, I mean, I think at one point we had 20 or 30 practical electricians just constructing stuff. They were there for months. We had, according to MBS, we had the most Asteras out of anything in the UK. I think we had the most LED. We emptied them of LED drivers. It was a huge undertaking, and from my point of view as the DP, like, these guys made all of that completely transparent. It was like everything being metered into the same world. It was very, very easy to just instantly kind of change stuff across a huge number of sets, go back to stuff that we'd had. But yeah, so going back to your question about XY, XY, like, I have played with the idea of, because it's, it gives you like nice, color crossfades work well in XY. You never sort of go through a weird bump, but we never really had to do much in the way of that type of stuff. So I think it would be, I would always speak to Chris and Callum with, we like talking about the chips in the LED, everything. Our sort of core source was a 5-channel LED tape, and then everything else was, we would try and get the Prac Sparks to build everything with the same exact tape, so the color, might not have been perfect, but it was at least the same. And we would just, speak in terms of the cool white, the warm white, and then the color chips on that, and kind of drive from there. And I think XY would have been more difficult to.
I was just going to say, like, that tape being the core part of like a lot of our sets. Like, one of our sets in particular was just riddled with it. There was 4 universes of 5-color tape across the entire set, and because that is RGB WW, that influenced the profiles that I chose for all of the lamps, all of the fixtures that we had. It made no sense or less sense to necessarily make them XY or to make them HSI, because at that point we're talking in terms of a red chip, a green chip, a blue chip, a white chip, and another white chip. But so it's easier then to talk about the lamps we're using on the floor, and if we are mixing a color, we can say, okay, we can bring that green chip, less of that green chip, and drive the blue a bit more, and then that's matching that color on the monitors and discussing that when we're at the monitors together.
Right, so I think that's what's interesting to me then is you're not actually talking about just colors. Now you're talking about these 5 elements. So that's actually talking about 5 different elements that have their own physics. And you understand it, you take the time to understand it during prep, and then you see what it does in camera. And then you've already built in an inherent language, practical language of, listen, I just need more of that green, because you know exactly what that green does. Or you know what the cool white does, you know what the warm white does. And then you start developing just that gut understanding on set?
Yeah.
To pull one and push the other, or?
I think we were helped out in this, in that, like, that was the aesthetic was very industrial sources. So
yeah.
If you pull around with those types of those fixtures, you're playing with you do end up with quite a industrial look. Like, it would have probably been the wrong approach for like a costume drama, or something where we had very specific like color, like as we talked earlier about gels. If there's a particular color that we really wanted to reproduce. This probably would have been the wrong way to do it, but because we were looking at these beautiful monitors, we had Flanders HDR monitors, but then Apple, because it's an Apple show, helped us out. We had their studio display XDRs, that they work great as well. Because we were sort of looking live at the final show, everything was, Mark and I on the Iris front, we were on the Crisell Expresses, which looked like completely different lenses every half a stop. So we'd pick the half stop that looked the way we wanted, and then all of the exposure and all of the color was just done, looking at the final image. So on top of what Tim was saying in terms of the reproducing the actual just light into your eyeballs, you've then got these additional levels of what the Alexas are doing with it, we had a lot of Ronin 4Ds, what they're doing with it, how that's all going back through the live grade, the show LUT, all of that stuff, and then finally being reproduced. So I think you'd go mad if you tried to completely perfectly. Oh, and the other thing I should say is we had huge amounts of virtual production, so that a lot of our sets were surrounded with that as well. So you've got a VP department, they're all on Disguise, that has its own color. Some of the stuff on the VP was plates we shot on Red cameras, some of it was Unreal Engine stuff, so there's a whole color space there. So then we had I felt in the past with VP stuff that the VP station was the wrong place to sort of control that, so we were sending out a live grade output from the DIT to the volume, so that was all kind of being controlled in a more photographically inspired way. But essentially it's a long way of saying that there's so many stages that to me it only makes sense just to look at that final image and go, yeah, just putting that green channel up on the Astera 992 looks great. Like, that's the result I want. And I think to unpick any more with the pace we were going we probably would have fallen over quite quickly.
Yeah. So I think the most important thing that you're saying is you need a really strong infrastructure of imaging set up. Like, you have to be able to trust your monitor, you have to trust the LUT, you have to trust the camera.
You have to trust the people. Like, you really, I'm a pretty nerdy DP, and I love getting into the weeds on this stuff. But like, you just can't. It's too complex. And in the same way that I've learned that, it's best for me to leave operating to professional operators. You need the team. You need to defer to the team, and let them. Callum and Chris do so much work behind the scenes to sort of at the point of actually shooting that I can just throw out ideas and really just have it work. Like, it's I used to work in theatre lighting, and when I first came into film, I was like, you've got nothing. What's that? Like, one 18K and a sky panel. And now actually film TV lighting has got so complicated. I think it's more complicated than a lot of live events. It's certainly, we move faster, we're changing locations more often, so we're building these. We were just in Berlin last month with a slightly different team, but the guys had to throw out a wireless control infrastructure across like half of central Berlin, with the day's rigging. Like, that sort of stuff doesn't happen in live events, really. It happens in film, and it's really only happened in the last sort of 5-10 years.
So speaking on that, when you're talking about members of your team, we always like to think that our lighting instruments end up becoming part of our team. So let's talk about that. How does fixture selection play into either the content on the creative level or just using tools that you trust? Chris?
Well, we had a sustainability policy on this job, so we were using as much LED as possible. When we're going for like a daylight punch through the window, we're using the brilliantly named Electrostorms, the Aperture XT 2600s. They were great. They are bicolor though, so that was more restricted. So when on the floor, everything had to be full color spectrum, and ideally CRMX as well, because we're trying to run things off either internal batteries or little mobile Instagrids, keeping the floor clear so us, Steadicam operators and all the extras aren't tripping over. So we don't want to then be running an XLR cable to something. So as wireless and as portable and as small as possible, but absolutely has to be full color spectrum so that he can be as creative as he wants to be and dial in all those dirty tungsten industrial colors, all the greens.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much defer to Chris on fixture selection, really. It's just sort of hard light, soft light, and these guys have to actually work with the fixtures. They're the ones who have to suddenly de-rig a crane because we've put one up that's not particularly reliable, or we have one that doesn't have the profiles that Callum needs. So for me, it makes sense. I feel like the LED, lighting now from where we started a few years back, like I no longer worry that we'll have something that can't reproduce a color that certainly meets what I'm happy with. It was sort of the Wild West a few years back, so now anything these guys propose is always great, and it's more about is it reliable, does it have additional features that we need, but the color across the board is, walk around the show now, it's hard to find stuff that is truly bad at color reproduction.
So we're going to open it up to questions here in just a few minutes. So just get your brain start thinking if you have anything. Tim, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, just a final thing, because I come very, my memory is very fresh from low budget indie. How do you do this if you were on a low budget indie and you didn't have as many resources and time, especially in prep? Because a lot of times you're just thrown into maybe at most a month prep, right, on like maybe a small feature or like a $1 million feature, or one. I don't even know how that could translate to pounds, but you know what I mean, right?
I think the one thing I say is there's no wrong answers. Like ultimately, like this stuff is great to know. I think as a practitioner, it's good to have a really firm understanding. But it's you don't have to have complete perfect color accuracy to shoot something that is moving or connects you to a story. Like that's so it's a grounding, but I don't think having all of the stuff is essential to the art of filmmaking. That said, I don't think it should be overlooked as like, I'm a very creative person, and I don't I think in the same way that when we're all lucky enough to be shooting more on film, cinematographers would have a really fundamental understanding of like film stocks and processing and that kind of technical knowledge. And I do think sometimes we've lost a little bit of that sort of desire to be over the technical side when it comes to stuff like this. And there's nothing more fundamental than like light and color when it comes to cinematography. So I would say don't feel like it's stopping you doing something, but definitely take the time, if you do, to at least understand the fundamentals of what's happening.
All right, so now we're going to open up for questions. Are there any questions out there? If you could stand up, that would be great. A microphone's going to come over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. Couple of questions that are linked. With regard to the monitors on set, what kind of calibration process do you go through to make sure that you're happy that the monitor is giving you an accurate view? And then once that's done, how do you allow for the changing ambient light, particularly if you're shooting on location?
It's a good question. The short answer is that ultimately it just sort of comes down to trust, because it's always different. Like it's different. It doesn't matter how perfect it is on set. Like at some point, I'm going to get a note from, an exec who's watched it on their phone next to a big window. Like all you can do is get as close as is practicable. So yes, I mean, if Mark was here, he could tell you how all the monitors are, probed and all of that stuff. And we obviously try and control the ambient a little bit. The Apple displays sort of in a very Apple-y way are just locked. You can't really control them. They know best. So a lot of it is just familiarity. I mean, this is going to sound crazy, but I've just shot so much over the years with Alexis that I feel honestly like my eye just calibrates off the on-screen display of the like all of the stuff on that gives me like a white point that I'm really used to, and then I feel like I can sort of go off that. But it's on set, you're never going to get perfect. That's what the grading suite is for, and that's why, we have that time to and I often say to production, it's one of the reasons you try and defend your grade time, right? Because you can be like, I'd never finish lighting on set. You couldn't and shoot the pace we do. So, we're never going to be dropping in teasers to take off that thing, and I'm never going to spend the time to just completely perfect some bit of color. Like, I'll get within like half a stop usually on everything, because I just know how much more quickly I can do that in post. So, yeah, there's a precision for me isn't required.
All right, another question out there? Yes, in the back. Stand up, please.
Hi, it's a question for Ed again. I was just wondering, when it comes to like pre-production and planning, if we could get more of a sort of, I guess like a baseline and outline of what your process is for selecting specific lights or even subtracting lights from a shot.
Yeah, I mean, the specific lights I usually will leave to Chris and team. When we a lot of our sets had to just have lighting built into it, so then that's very art department driven. You're sort of fighting for spaces in there, like when it comes to LED tape in sets, like every art department ever always leaves you not enough depth, and so you're constantly trying to sink tape deeper in so you don't get so yeah, it's very art departmenty at that stage. And then as Chris and I started working on this, we would just be on locations, and it would just be we need a sort of softy top lighty thing, and we need some kind of harder stuff here, and the details of which, like I've learned, it just works better to leave the exact fixture choice to Chris, because it also, stuff has to change, doesn't it? Like, stuff isn't available.
It will come down to budget and availability as well.
Yeah.
We don't always get to choose. Stephen Ferguson, who shot the second block of Hijack, would describe himself as lighting agnostic. He's very specific about diffusion, but he's lighting agnostic. He doesn't care what the source is, and which is, I think I've adopted that expression because I don't think you can be that specific, because you're always going to come up against a time where, like last week, sorry, you can't have any of them. He-Man's got every single one of those lights in the country. So you have to then adapt and just say, well, okay, well, I need another full spectrum panel that I can do similar job with, and you just take what's available.
You want your team to have agency because it's more fun. I know with my work with directors, like, it's really boring to work with a director who's incredibly prescriptive about everything I do, and I think that sort of follows down. So I think it's more fun for everyone when you allow people the freedom to exercise their own area of expertise.
So you also have to pray that He-Man and Skeletor don't steal all your lights.
Maybe someone was like, we can't get any Asteras because those Hijack guys have got all of them. Don't worry, there's infinite Asteras.
You've done it to others. So as we wrap up, just a general question that we always ask of the panelists: where are we going? Where are we going with fixtures, with color, with control? If you guys want to give a last thought on that.
I think for me, in my experience of that, I would say, like, definitely things that I'm looking for more with upcoming lights is that increased color control in lower percentages. We're working with much faster ISOs and cameras and stuff, and we're using a lot less light in more difficult scenarios. I was driving a lot of lights at DMX1, which are in like a percentage scale is like 0.3 or 1% on a sky panel. The way a color changes between like those like 0 to 10% on some of the LED fixtures is horrendous. So you're constantly having to create palettes and mix as the percentage keeps going down and down and down to like 0.7, 0.6, 0.5. So I think for me, those low level, retaining that color, I don't know what the word is, but like that color purity at a much lower level on the lamp would be a massive game changer for me in my world.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, I find, a lot of times you'll have sources that either at DMX1 or they're not bright enough, and you find yourself rarely having it's about 50%. It's never that. I think industry's made great strides in everything being wireless built in. That now seems to be way more reliable. That's really great. Is a lot of stuff now has virtual production. Like, I'm excited for that industry is, we're still using panels designed for live events, and we're sort of getting better joined up stuff on there. But in the movie I did my fault that's just come out. It has a huge lots of driving sequences, and that was all in volume, all the internal stuff, and I ended up having to just create sources made out of the tiles in that volume stage, because it was the only way to sort of throw extra light into the vehicles and have the kind of color feel the same. That was one where I suddenly felt like I'm missing the color matching here is not working, and it would have taken too much time to match the studio lighting to what that volume was doing. So I think those worlds are getting close together, which is exciting.
And well, I'm very interested to see another of your products, the bigger new 5200 Electrostorm. So when we can finally get rid of all HMI, then I think that's gonna be a positive move. So yeah, bigger, more powerful. That's gonna definitely benefit me.
Excellent. You can check that out in the Aperture stand after the presentation. Tim, final thought?
Yeah, I mean, everything that we've been talking about is stuff that Ben and I, in multiple companies now, have obsessed about and tried to support, not just in our products, but also with stuff like this, because education and just understanding these issues is extremely critical, because there's no point in putting something into a product or putting something into software if you don't understand why you need it. So, we're doing we have a couple of seminars that you can go to our booth and talk and find out about next week that delve into these topics further, if you want more information, because it's important. Like, you have to educate yourself. It doesn't just work, as you can tell. I mean, that's why I was asking about the infrastructure, right? You have to be able to trust your infrastructure and know what that infrastructure is. You don't want Dunning-Kruger to take into effect and not know what you don't know. So just learning what these factors are, I think, are just as important as the tools themselves. So.
All right, well, that wraps us up for this panel on color. First, I want to thank the BSC for allowing us to be here. And our guests here, we have Ed Moore, BSC. Let's give it up for Ed, everybody. Callum Crisell, the desktop programmer. Chris Stones, the gaffer. And Tim Kang, our imaging specialist from Aperture.
We're very sorry James' friend wasn't here.
Yeah, James couldn't be here, so for everybody that came to see him and got stuck with us, we apologize for that.
He's collecting another award.
So that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to come up or check us out in the stand, and I just want to thank everybody for being here.